You never quite know how your day's going to go out on the water, kind of like this crew found out here when they went to go launch the boat down at Horton Park Boat Ramp in Cape Coral and somehow wound up launching a little more than the boat, as seen in the images here. Here you can see their SUV is floating away off the boat ramp after they tried to launch their vessel. Now unfortunately for this crew, they tried several rescue attempts to try and get the SUV out of the water, but unfortunately they all failed and it wound up sinking. But just one of the wild and crazy things we'll see in this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Sarasota, Florida, where this was the scene just a few days ago when police in Sarasota had to perform a high-speed rescue when a boat wound up losing its captain and wound up circling around in the bay at over 40 miles an hour. The images shown here show the Sarasota Police Department approaching the unmanned vessel. According to reports, the captain of the vessel was ejected from the boat and he was not wearing his safety kill switch lanyard, allowing the vessel to continue on without him. Here we can see that the police slowly approach the vessel, just lightly nudging it, allowing one of the officers on board the boat to go ahead and board the runaway vessel and pull the throttle back, bringing the vessel to a stop. Sarasota Police Department actually wound up catching this from several angles, as we'll see in the images here. This angle shows just how risky the move was, having the officer jump from the police boat over to the moving vessel. According to the reports, several agencies including the Coast Guard, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office, and CETO all responded to the incident. CETO was able to use a tow line to assist in slowing the boat down to give the officers a better shot to board the vessel. The rescued boater told police after the incident that he was thrown from his boat after he tried to avoid another vessel that wound up cutting him off. Police say he was not wearing a life jacket at the time of the incident and remind people always to wear a life jacket when out on the water, and also remind people that a safety kill switch on many boats is required by law, that you wear it anytime the vessel is in operation. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Vietnam, where this was the scene just this past week when a box ship and a bulker wound up colliding on Vietnam's Long Tao River. According to reports, the box ship KMTC Surabaya wound up colliding with the bulker Glengyle at milepost 15 on the Long Tao River. According to reports, Sarabia's near vertical plumb bow made contact with Glengyle's port side just forward of the bulker's deckhouse. It wound up hitting with enough force that it wound up peeling back the Glengyle's hull plating and penetrating deep into the bulker's hold, as seen in the images here. The larger vessel's port bow came to rest against a cargo crane on the Glengyle's centerline just forward of the bridge deck. One of the Glengyle's hatch covers was torn off, and by force it appeared to be partially embedded into the Sarabia's bow. Flooding wound up happening to the Glengyle from the hull being ripped open by the larger vessel. As the images show, the vessel winds up partially sinking until it winds up resting on the shallow riverbed's bottom. As of this past weekend, the two ships were still interlocked on the river, with tug vessels on the scene and monitoring the situation. A perimeter has been set up around the incident, as fuel oil could be seen spilling from the bulker's tanks. Fortunately, in this situation, no injuries were reported, and the Sarabia's cargo appears to be intact. Now, this is far from the first collision in which a vessel with a plumb bow wound up penetrating and sinking another ship. In fact, back in 2021, we reported on an incident of an aluminum superyacht, the Utopia 4, and the tanker Tropic Breeze wound up colliding in the Bahamas, and the Utopia 4's plumb bow wound up sinking that tanker as well. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Clearwater, Florida, where this was the scene this past weekend when a 37-foot boat wound up rear-ending a 40-foot Clearwater passenger ferry that was carrying 44 people who were leaving the Sugar Sands Festival this past weekend. The images here show the 37-foot pleasure craft being confiscated by local authorities, as the incident currently as it stands is possibly being considered as a hit and run, as after the vessel wound up hitting the ferry, they wound up leaving the scene. Here's security camera footage shows moments just before the incident occurs. You can see the ferry moving slowly under the bridge and the 37-foot vessel coming up quickly behind. According to reports, the vessel wound up going completely on top of the ferry with almost 3/4 of the boat winding up on top of the ferry. Right after the incident, this vessel actually fled the scene. Fortunately, FWC was able to catch up with this boat approximately 3.5 miles away. The 62-year-old captain who was driving the boat at the time of the incident did submit to a breathalyzer test and no alcohol was found to be in his system, but what's really strange about this is there are multiple injuries and this is a pretty bad situation, yet somehow the captain of that boat was let to go free as they did not hold him or charge him with any crimes at this time. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Georgia, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago, where the cargo vessel, the Evermo, wound up having an incident with the cargo vessel wound high in the port of Savannah. According to local reports, the Evermo was being turned by tugs in the turning basin when all of a sudden, the incident you're about to witness wound up happening as the two vessels wound up getting a little too close for comfort. And as you can see and hear from the images, the two vessels wind up colliding in the port. Fortunately, in this situation, it happened at very low speeds, so the damage was actually minimal to both vessels. No lines wound up popping, and no injuries were actually reported, which is a very fortunate situation because at the time of the actual incident, port ops were underway. There were actually 5 cranes working at the time, several working to help unload the Juan High during the actual collision. Both vessels did suffer some minor superficial damage as you can see in the images here, but no major damage was reported, and according to local reports, both vessels were able to continue underway with their normal operations. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Cabo Verde, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago when the vessel NHO Padre Benjamin, operated by Verde Lines, was transporting some construction equipment when all of a sudden the vessel began to take on water and wound up sinking as seen in the images here. There were 19 crew members on board the ship at the time of the incident. Fortunately, all 19 were able to successfully evacuate the ship and be rescued by some local Good Samaritans before the vessel went down. The crew did try to do what they could to stop the water from coming on board the vessel, but unfortunately were unsuccessful, and the boat does eventually wind up sinking. Local governments wound up praising those who assisted in rescuing the crew off the boat, but now that the vessel has fully gone under, local government officials are switching their concerns to the environmental risks that the vessel sinking winds up posing with all the fuel and equipment that was on board. Local governments are starting to assess the situation. The first thing they said they need to determine is the depth at which the vessel wound up sinking. Due to the remoteness of the location and lack of equipment in the area, one of their major concerns right now is if the vessel wound up sinking in over 70 meters of water, they don't even have the proper equipment needed to try and remove the fuel from the vessel. But it will be interesting to see what kind of plans they come up with over the next several weeks as they assess the situation. Thanks for watching, crew. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out in your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button.